the heart of the Ottoman Empire, behind gilded gates and marble columns, a silent war was waged. But this war wasn't fought with swords. It was fought with glances, whispers, poisoned words, and bloodline ambition. Two women, trapped in the same golden cage, shared the love of the most powerful man in the world, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. But make no mistake, this wasn't a love story. Mahidevran, the dignified first consort, mother of the Sultan's firstborn son, she had everything, until Hürrem arrived, a slave girl with fire in her eyes. Hürrem was supposed to serve. Instead, she conquered. And what followed was not just jealousy. It was betrayal, violence, and the fall of dynasties. One would rise higher than any woman before her. You think royal drama is fiction? Think again. Because this story, it's real. And someone doesn't make it out alive. Long before Hürrem ever stepped foot inside the palace, there was Mahidevran. She wasn't just another concubine. She was the woman, elegant, composed, born of noble Albanian blood. She had beauty, yes, but what truly set her apart was presence. Mahidevran knew she belonged beside a sultan, and for a time, no one questioned it. She was handpicked for Sultan Suleiman, chosen not just to please, but to carry his legacy. And she did. She gave him Mustafa, his firstborn son, his heir, the boy everyone believed would be the next ruler of the Ottoman Empire. With that single birth, Mahidevran's place in the palace was sealed, or so she thought. She walked the marble halls not like a servant, but like a queen in waiting. Other women bowed to her. The Valide Sultan, Suleiman's mother, treated her like family. Mahidevran wasn't just part of the harem. She ruled it. And in her heart, she believed she had outplayed everyone. She believed time was on her side. But here's the thing about palaces. They're not built on stone. They're built on secrets. And in that golden prison, every smile hides a knife. Mahidevran had the sun. She had the title. But what she didn't know was that her time was already running out. Because just outside the palace walls, a girl was being taken from her homeland. A girl with fire in her soul. A girl whose name would one day wipe Mahidevran's from the history books. Her name was Hürrem, but Mahidevran didn't see it coming. Why would she? When Hürrem first entered the harem, she was nothing. Just another slave girl in a line of many. No family, no titles, no history worth mentioning. Mahidevran barely noticed her. She had no reason to. But within weeks, she would feel her. And within months, she would fear her. Because Hürrem didn't play by the rules. She rewrote them. And Mahidevran, so sure, so confident, would be forced to watch everything she built crack and crumble, piece by piece. Still, in those early days, Mahidevran clung to her pride, to her son, to the love she believed would never be taken from her. She whispered to herself that Hürrem was just a passing fancy, a phase, that Suleiman would come to his senses, that she would always be his first. But in the Ottoman court, first means nothing. Not when another woman knows how to steal your place, right from under your silk-covered feet. And Mahidevran? She was about to learn that in a palace full of diamonds, even the smallest spark can set the world on fire. She didn't come to the palace in silk. She came in chains. No name, no title, just a girl from the far, cold lands of Ruthenia. Taken, sold, branded for a life of silence and servitude. They called her Alexandra once, but that name died the moment she crossed the palace gates. Inside, she was given a new name, Hürrem. It meant the cheerful one. But nothing about her smile was ever innocent, because while the other girls wept for their families, Hürrem watched, waited, calculated. She saw the harem for what it truly was, not a prison, but a battlefield, and in a place where beauty was currency. Hürrem traded not just in charm, but in strategy. While Mahidevran walked with pride, Hürrem knelt with purpose. And then she rose. She rose with speed no one could explain. The Sultan Suleiman, the man of wars, the shadow of kings, became obsessed. Not enchanted, not infatuated, obsessed. He didn't just want Hürrem in his chambers. He wanted her in his world. And she made sure she never left. One night became a week A week became a habit, and soon, Mahidevran's name wasn't even whispered. But Hürrem didn't just stop at the Sultan's bed. She wanted everything, and that terrified the court. She mocked the women who tried to bring her down. She laughed when they cursed her. She smiled through ambushes, threats, even beatings. Because she knew. Pain passes. Power does not. The more the palace tried to break her, the more Hürrem learned to twist it. She flattered the right guards, earned the favor of the Valide Sultan. She even converted to Islam. Not just out of faith, but as a declaration. She wasn't going anywhere. And with every son she bore for Suleiman, her roots dug deeper. One child, then another, each one a nail in Mahidevran's coffin. By the time Mahidevran realized what was happening, it was too late. Hürrem wasn't a passing flame. She was a storm, and storms don't ask for permission. They destroy. But Hürrem's power wasn't built on seduction. It was built on control. She could read people like books, and burn their pages without ever lighting a match. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She planned. And when the moment came, she demanded something unthinkable. Marriage. No concubine in Ottoman history had ever become a legal wife. But Hürrem? She did. And with that signature, she rewrote centuries of tradition and carved her name into the bones of an empire. The harem had many beautiful women, but only one would walk out as a queen. This was no ordinary feud. It didn't start with screaming or slaps. It started in silence and ended in blood. In the heart of the Topkapi Palace, two women stood at the center of a war, not with armies, but with ambition. Mahidevran, the proud mother of Sultan Suleiman's firstborn son, Mustafa. She had the bloodline, the tradition, the respect. Hürrem, the former slave, now mother to 5 royal children, including the one who would one day wear the Sultan's crown. It wasn't about who the Sultan loved. Not anymore. It was about who would survive. Because in the Ottoman Empire, only one woman's son could inherit the throne. And for that to happen, the others had to fall. The palace halls may have echoed with music, but behind those velvet curtains were whispers, dark ones. Mahidevran and Hürrem didn't fight with fists. Not at first. They fought with poison, not in goblets, but in words, fed directly into the ears of the only man who mattered, Suleiman. And he listened to both. But the more Mahidevran pleaded, the more Hürrem smiled. Because Hürrem didn't just understand Suleiman. She controlled him. She knew when to cry, when to laugh, when to disappear, and when to make a scene so perfectly timed that it shattered everything Mahidevran tried to build. Still, Mahidevran wasn't weak. She was a lioness with a wounded legacy. And lions, when cornered, strike. One night, pushed beyond humiliation, Mahidevran snapped. She cornered Hürrem. Alone. No guards. No maids. No eyes. And she attacked. Physically. Furiously. Dragging her down by the hair. Scratching her face. Screaming curses into the air. And Hürrem? She didn't fight back. Not with fists. She cried. She let the bruises show. Let the servants see. Let the Sultan hear. And when he did, he didn't rage. He didn't scream. He went silent. Which, in Suleiman's world, was worse. Because silence, from a sultan, meant judgment. The next day, Mahidevran was summoned, and the halls that once echoed her laughter now swallowed her footsteps in dread. She had struck the Sultan's favorite, the woman he would later marry, the mother of his youngest sons. And without realizing it, in a fit of rage, Mahidevran didn't just strike Hürrem's face. She struck her own fate. From that moment forward, she was no longer untouchable, no longer first. She was watched, controlled, pushed aside. Hürrem, bruised but triumphant, rose higher than ever before. She wasn't just a concubine now. She was an institution, an empire within the empire. And Mahidevran? She remained the mother of the Sultan's first son. But the shadow of exile had already begun to stretch across her feet. The battle between them wasn't over. But in this round, Mahidevran had lost more than her temper. She had lost her power. Because in the palace, violence doesn't destroy your enemy. It exposes you. And Hürrem was always watching. After that day, Mahidevran never truly returned. Yes, she still walked the palace halls, still wore the silks, still held her title as the mother of the Sultan's firstborn son. But her power, it had already slipped between her fingers, and in its place stood Hürrem, not just standing, rising. She wasn't content with being favorite or beloved. Hürrem wanted more, a seat no woman had ever claimed before, and the Sultan gave it to her. He didn't just keep Hürrem by his side, he married her. Let that sink in. No concubine in Ottoman history had ever become a legal wife. It was unthinkable, unacceptable, until it wasn't. With one ceremony, one signature, Hürrem shattered centuries of tradition, and with it, Mahidevran's last thread of hope. Because now, it was official. Hürrem wasn't just in the palace. She was of the palace, unmovable, unstoppable. And while Mahidevran clung to her son Mustafa, a boy beloved by the army, praised by scholars, adored by the people, even that would not be enough. Because in Hürrem's world, legacy was a strategy. She bore 5 children for Suleiman, not just sons, but potential heirs. She didn't put her faith in tradition. She built her empire with children, alliances, and whispers in the Sultan's ear. And the most dangerous whisper was one of fear. That perhaps Mustafa, Mahidevran's son, had grown too powerful, too popular, too loved, too ready. And in a world where one prince becomes sultan, the others don't get banished. They get erased. Hürrem knew this, and she played the long game. For years, she sowed doubt, fed it like a fire, until even Suleiman, the father, looked at his firstborn son with suspicion. And Mahidevran? She saw it happening. She felt it happening. But she couldn't stop it, because her enemies weren't screaming. They were smiling. And one by one, the walls closed in. Eventually, Mahidevran was forced to leave the palace, stripped of influence, sent away to live with her son Mustafa in the provinces. But even that wasn't safety, because wherever Mustafa went, rumors followed, whispers of rebellion, hints of betrayal, none proven. But in the Ottoman court, proof isn't required, only doubt. And that doubt, it bloomed like poison. Years later, under the weight of paranoia and politics, Suleiman made a decision that would haunt the empire forever. He ordered the execution of his own son, Mustafa. The prince who once marched through the palace with laughter was now dragged through the dust, strangled by men who once bowed to him. And Mahidevran? She wasn't there to stop it. She could only grieve and fade. The woman who had once ruled the harem, once whispered to be the next Valide Sultan, now wandered in exile. No title, no son, no power. She outlived Mustafa, but her soul didn't. Back in the palace, Hürrem sat beside the Sultan, crowned in silence, feared in shadows, and revered in history. She had won, but at what cost? Because in this palace, no one wins clean. The crown is bought in blood, and queens are made of scars. When the dust finally settled, there were no parades, no celebrations, only silence. Mahidevran had lost everything. Her son, her legacy, her place in the palace. She lived out her final days alone, in Bursa, far from the marble halls, where she once ruled like a queen. There, she was not royalty, just a grieving mother, a memory in silk, a name that once carried thunder, now whispered in past tense. But history never forgets those who bleed for power. And Mahidevran? She bled quietly, elegantly, and in the end, tragically. Hürrem, on the other hand, remained, until her final breath. She was the most powerful woman the empire had ever known. From a slave, to legal wife, to political advisor, to mother of the next sultan, Selim II. But her legacy wasn't just in titles. It was in transformation. Hürrem changed the Ottoman Empire. Before her, no woman had dared to involve herself in state affairs. After her, it became tradition. She laid the groundwork for what historians would call the Sultanate of Women, a century where women behind the veil pulled the strings of empires. Palace architects even built her a private palace beside the Sultan's, a gesture no other woman had received. And the mosque she commissioned in Istanbul still stands today, etched with her name. But not everyone saw her rise as glory. To some, she was the embodiment of ambition gone too far, the mastermind behind Mustafa's death, the woman who poisoned not just rivals, but the very idea of tradition. Because when women gain power in a world built by men, they are not remembered as rulers. They are remembered as threats. And in many ways, that's how history would divide them. Mahidevran, the noble mother who lost everything, yet died with dignity. Hürrem, the brilliant schemer who won it all, but at the cost of her soul. But here's the truth no one wants to admit. Neither woman was a villain. Neither was a saint. They were survivors. In a world that demanded women remain silent, they spoke. In a palace that expected them to serve, they ruled. And in a game designed by men, they played it better. Centuries later, their rivalry still echoes in film, in books, in whispers. Not because of the dresses they wore, or the men they loved, but because they dared. Mahidevran dared to love fiercely, to fight for her son, to stand tall even as the world collapsed around her. Hürrem dared to rise, to change the rules, to be more than what they told her she was. And in that way, they both left behind something greater than titles. They became stories. Stories told in every woman who refuses to be forgotten, in every voice that speaks, even when silence is expected. Their war may have ended, but the echoes, they're still here. Because in the Ottoman Empire, queens didn't wear crowns. They wore scars. And sometimes, those scars outlived the empires themselves.